For quite some time now, GMC has been positioning themselves as the premium truck brand in America, thanks in no small part to the sub-brand Denali, found on everything from a Yukon to a Sierra, and now the all-new 2023 GMC Canyon. For 2023, this is easily the most premium mid-sized truck in America, but more importantly, the entire Canyon lineup is now a bit more differentiated from its Chevy cousin. Let me apologize in advance if I accidentally call the Colorado a Canyon or vice versa at any point in this video. The confusion is understandable because they do share quite a lot. They share frames, they share drivetrains, a lot of interior components, etc. But the two vehicles have different styling, different pricing, and different missions as well. If you want the Denali trim, obviously you're going to find that only in the GMC lineup. We also find what I think is more attractive styling. This has the sort of mini Sierra thing going on up here for the grille. We have divorced headlights, so the headlights down here, accent lights above. That is definitely different than the mini Silverado styling in the Colorado. LED fog lights right there sort of in the middle of the bumper because we have this off-road cutout section of the bumper in every version of the Canyon. That's definitely one point of differentiation. If you take a look at the Chevy version, the bumper actually comes out here in most of those versions, except if you get the more off-road oriented version. So even the Denali trim is going to have that off-road cutout. At least for the moment, GMC is going for a one-size-fits-all approach with the new Canyon. Every version is going to have a crew cab and a 61.7-inch box behind. This is a little bit longer than some of the shortest half-ton trucks in America, but certainly easier to park than the average half-ton. On the Chevy side of things, the Colorado is available with a narrow body or a wide body, but the wide body treatment is standard on the Canyon, certainly giving this a more muscular appearance, and I really like the boxiness of these fender flares front and rear. Also standard on this is the higher horsepower version of the 2.7-liter turbo, which is why the base price tag of the GMC is higher than the Chevy. That's the other point of differentiation you should know. $38,395 is where this starts, and that is notably higher than the base price tag on the Colorado. The wide stance also looks pretty good from the rear. We have pretty standard truck tail lights where they're just on the body, nothing moves over there to the tailgate. Big GMC logo, just about as big Denali logo right below. We do get a damped tailgate, which is a nice touch, and we don't find that in all mid-sized trucks in America. In here, we also have a bit of additional storage. The storage area is watertight. You can see the rubber seal right there, and it's about 44 inches long inside, so you can put things like small fishing reels, maybe some tools inside. In case you're wondering, the lower portion of the bumper is metal. We have molded in side steps right there, parking sensors integrated into the back, 2-inch receiver over there, and 4-pin and 7-pin wiring harness connections. A number of different running boards are offered from the factory, but none of them are powered, even in the Denali trim. So keep that in mind if you want to take your Canyon off-road. Comparably equipped, the Colorado and the Canyon are very similarly priced, but we find a lot more standard in the Canyon than in the Colorado. In the Chevy, there are 3 different power levels of the standard 2.7-liter turbo. In the Canyon, we find just the high output version, 310 horsepower, 430 pound-feet of torque. This is essentially the latest generation of the 2.7-liter turbo, also found in GM's half-ton trucks. You can get this with either rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. So if you'd like 310 horsepower, 430 pound-feet of torque just through the rear wheels, you can do that in the Canyon. Of course, if you want locking differentials, things like that, you can also do that in the Canyon. Logically, fuel economy on the GMC is going to be a little bit below the Chevy on average because we get the wide body treatment standard that is optional on the Chevy. We also get the aggressive front bumper cutouts, which are less aerodynamic, and of course we get the highest horsepower version of this engine. Comparably equipped, they're going to be very similar, but finding a comparably equipped Canyon in Colorado is now a bit more difficult in this generation. As in the competition, payload and towing figures will change based on the trim and the options you select. Payload should range between 1,010 pounds and 1,640 pounds, depending on the trim level. This particular Denali trim came in at 1,314 pounds according to its door sticker. Keep in mind that adding things like running boards from the factory, any sort of additional bed liners, etc., those could all impact your payload figures, and payload does include the driver. Towing capacity should range between 5,500 and 7,700 pounds depending on the version that you get. Keep in mind, of course, the tongue weight comes out of payload as well. So for this truck, theoretically, I could tow about 7,000 pounds, but I wouldn't be able to take any passengers with me if I was towing those heavier weights because I'd be right at the payload maximum. After a day behind the wheel, I found front seat comfort to be excellent for a mid-size truck, but keep in mind that in the full-size segment, we do find more adjustable front seats. For instance, even in this Denali trim, we only have two-way adjustable lumbar support, and I would have loved to have seen four-way lumbar, especially with the Denali logo on the side. We do have a two-position seat memory over there, manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion, and we do have a passenger seat that is powered in this model, including the two-way lumbar support over there. If you're looking for bigger back seats, that's still one of the reasons to step up into the Sierra lineup. Obviously, we don't have as much room back here as we find in that full-size truck. Sitting right here behind myself, I have about an inch of legroom left. If I scoot all the way over to this side, where the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, then my knees are definitely digging into the seat back. We also don't find a rear passenger area that is quite as wide, obviously, as a half-ton truck, but headroom is pretty decent. If I put my head back here, it is touching the back of this rear cab, but there are certainly tighter back seats out there. Rear seat passengers get air vents, USB charge-only ports, and rear seat bottom cushions that flip up to give us access to a little bit of extra storage, and of course the tire iron and the jack. Let's take a look around the Denali interior first. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof just over the driver and front passengers' heads, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. Front seat backs feature the Denali logo embroidered quite prominently there. We have a two-tone color scheme going on, the same as the back seats. We find contrasting piping, contrasting stitching, and this contrasting stripe on the seat back. We have perforations on the seat back and seat bottom cushion because these seats are both heated and ventilated. And that two-tone color scheme continues on over to the door, where we also find something quite unusual for a mid-sized truck. Real wood trim right there on the doors, just as you find in some of the other Denali models offered in the US. Also some extra stitching there and soft touch armrests. If you like to rest your elbow on the windowsill as I do, you should know that the upper section of the door is all made from hard plastic. I had expected something a bit softer in the Denali trim. That hard plastic continues over to the dashboard where the upper section is made from a hard material, as is the lower section of the dashboard, for instance, right around that large bin-style glove compartment. But we do have the soft touch material right here in the middle, basically a stitched component, the same as we find over there on the doors with more of that cross stitching. We also find the real wood trim insert there. It has been laser etched to give it a little bit of extra character. We also find the Denali logo in there and the coordinates for Mount Denali itself. Nice big air vents, lots of really attractive touches going right across the dashboard to center this enormous touchscreen infotainment system. It of course supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's the latest software that we find also in the full-size truck lineup from GMC. Down here we find controls for the heated and ventilated front seats, lots of physical controls for the climate control system, in case you're a fan of physical buttons. Toggles down here for things like a button to lower all the windows, auto start, stop, disable, the lane keeping assist system, and one auxiliary switch. I would love to have more, but I'm glad we have at least one here. USB inputs for the infotainment system, also Qi wireless charging mat there. We of course also have 2 high, 4 low, and then this knob rotates around to give us the various drive modes. Different trims of Canyon will have different drive modes available, but they're all going to have excellent animations on the central LCD. The shifter is a pretty traditional console shifter. We have an electric parking brake right there, 2 big cup holders, a small armrest in the middle. You can see the cup holders for the rear passengers behind, and this opens to reveal a fairly small storage area. On the driver's side, we have an available heads-up display and a full LCD instrument cluster. The LCD cluster offers us a few different layouts. We have a fairly basic digital design there with a big GMC logo. We have much more of an off-road focused layout here, which I think is pretty darn cool. We also have another simple layout, which has even less information for more of a clean look. We have an option here where we have infotainment on one side, trip computer information over there on the other side, big central speedometer there, and then more of a dual dial layout right like that. The steering wheel is an attractive 4-spoke design, no paddle shifters on the back. The only way to shift gears is with this toggle switch right here on that shifter. On this side, we find some buttons that control the multifunction LCD cluster, steering wheel heat, phone hang-up and pickup button, voice command button, cruise control buttons over here on this side, and the rest of the infotainment buttons, those are on the back of the steering wheel. We have volume up, down on one side, track forward, backward on the other. What's the base elevation trim look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is what the front seats look like. You can see that we get less stitching. We don't have those accents on the seats. We also are missing one of the soft touch inserts on the front doors. So you can see we have a soft touch armrest right there, but this sort of knee section right there, that is a hard plastic. Over here on the dashboard, we have a soft touch insert right here in the middle, but it doesn't have the stitching that we find in the other versions. Very similar trim to the AT4 going on right there across the dashboard. And we get the same large LCD infotainment system right here in the middle. 2-zone climate control still there, and you can see that this has the connected navigation services as well. Keep in mind that connected features in this infotainment system are going to require a subscription after the trial period has been exceeded. This particular model doesn't have a 2-speed transfer case, so it is 4-wheel drive, but no 2-speed transfer case there. And over here on the driver's side, we have the smaller LCD instrument cluster, but obviously no heads-up display. One of the benefits of attending a launch event like this is that I've been able to spend a reasonable amount of time in every version of the Canyon. Right now, I'm in the base elevation trim, which is a lot less basic than most of the options in this segment. Again, that's part of why we find that higher price tag. This has an excellently tuned suspension, really well designed for the enormous potholes that are on this road. Some of these big potholes are about 6 inches deep. Now, this model is not an absolute base version because it does have 4-wheel drive, it has the sunroof and a few things like that. The 4-wheel drive system in this model does not have a 2-speed transfer case. That is one thing you'll find in some of the other trims. You have to option up into that. So things start out rear-wheel drive, then we get 4-wheel drive, then we get a 4-wheel drive with a true 4-low. If you're trying to decide between a single speed and a 2-speed transfer case, I would say it's really dependent on the kind of off-roading that you're doing. This kind of trail, just fine with a single speed. Trail that is 5 times harder than this, still probably just fine with a single speed. If you want to rock climb, rock crawl, if you want to go to Moab, etc., then you're probably going to want the low ratio mode. However, this is going to be pretty capable even without it because we get so much low-end torque from this 2.7-liter turbo. And that's a big advantage over the previous generation of the Canyon, whether we're talking about the base 4-cylinder engine or the V6 engine. This has more torque than both of those practically combined and at much lower RPMs. So even in the single-speed transfer case model like this, you get a lot more pulling power, a lot more crawling power than you would get in the older Canyon. Out on the paved road, where you're going to spend most of your time, the power and the torque from the 2.7-liter turbo is definitely very obvious. We ran 0 to 60 in this model in 6.7 seconds in our preliminary testing out here in North Carolina. Now, you will have to wait until I can get this at home for official 0 to 60 and 60 to 0 stopping distances, but this is going to be one of the swifter trucks available. I should add a qualifier to that. I am, of course, referring to trucks that this is competing with, like the Honda Ridgeline, the Toyota Tacoma, the Chevy Colorado, and, of course, the Jeep Gladiator. When it comes to handling and ride quality, I think GMC has found a solid balance for the Canyon. Out on the rougher road like we were on earlier, you will definitely notice that the rear end can sort of hop around at a slightly different rate than the front end of the vehicle. Remember that in pickup trucks, the bed is an awful lot lighter than the front. That's just how they all are, but nothing out of the ordinary going on there. The one downside to a smaller displacement turbo engine like this is that we don't get a great deal of engine braking. You'll really notice that going downhill, especially if you had a trailer on the back of the truck. So a vehicle like this is going to rely much more on the brakes of the vehicle and the brakes on your trailer than a larger displacement option, say something like the Nissan Frontier. The Frontier doesn't have a great deal of engine braking compared to a half-ton truck, but it does have more than we find in here or in the Ford Ranger, and likely the upcoming Tacoma, because all indications point to that getting a smaller displacement turbo as well. As far as the suspension and handling goes, I think that GMC has found a great balance for this truck. It has a good sorted on-road driving dynamic, even with the off-road tires that are on some of the other models that I was out here driving. On trails, that does come across as being perhaps a little bit too firm at times, but that's of course where the AT4X comes in, because it is tuned a little bit softer, a little bit more trail focused than this elevation trim. This is a really solid option for something looking for a good, inexpensive, easy to park truck. Inexpensive, of course, should be in air quotes there because this model is about $40,000 or so, but we get a lot of good standard equipment, a very comfortable driver's seat, solid driving dynamics, quiet cabin, pretty peppy engine, and decent performance as well. It's a bit difficult to talk about fuel economy because I haven't been driving this at home, but so far today I've been averaging about 25 miles per gallon in this single-speed transfer case model. It's worth noting that the model you select and the tires that you put on your truck are going to have big impacts on the fuel economy. So AT4X is going to be the least efficient version of this truck. The base rear-wheel drive model is going to be the most efficient version. And compared to the Sierra, you're not necessarily going to get that much better fuel economy in the Canyon because even though this is a little bit smaller, it's not as much smaller as you might think, and some of the aerodynamic realities of a pickup truck don't change too much. Also, another weird twist is because the MSRPs are higher on those half-ton trucks, they can spend more money on some advanced aerodynamic trickery in order to help smooth things out, get the best fuel economy possible. And on less expensive, smaller trucks, we generally don't find that same sort of extra focus on fuel economy. Now it's time to take the new Canyon out on the trail, and for this duty, we have the AT4X trim. You see we get the rock rails here, we also get an extra inch of ground clearance, we get pretty aggressive all-terrain tires. These are Goodyear Territory tires on this particular model, and if you get the Edition 1 version, then we get some AEV accessories up front. For the Edition 1 trim, GMC worked with the AEV, so it looks very factory integrated. We get the brush guard up front, the sort of hoop style there. We get an off-road light bar right there. Fog lights are relocated to this portion of the bumper, and you can see it integrates right there with the lower part of the factory bumper design. So this section is the same. Everything inside is part of the AEV package, and then we get a winch with a synthetic cable. For the first hour or so on this trail, we were driving at moderate speeds, 35, 40 miles an hour, etc. And that's where the multi-mode dampers and the extra damper reservoir is really important because it helps prevent damper fade, damper overheating, etc. This suspension is also well designed for the kind of terrain that we're now going to be going on here, where we're going to be in sort of mud ruts here for a while. The suspension definitely is well designed for that. You can see there's lots of articulation going on that truck in front of us there. We also have front lockers and rear lockers in the AT4X trim of the truck. The front locker is definitely a point of differentiation between this and the Toyota Tacoma, at least in its current version. We don't know what the next generation is going to bring us, but the current version does not have a front locker available, and it does not have an auto mode for its four-wheel drive system. Auto mode is the mode that you're going to want to be in most of the time. It's going to send power to the front axle when it's needed, but it's going to operate as a rear-wheel drive truck for better efficiency out on the open highway. It's available really quite quickly as far as transferring the power to the front axle. That makes this much more sure-footed on snow, on icy surfaces, or even muddy surfaces like this. Honestly, this portion of the trail could be done in 4 auto as well. This type of system is really important, I think, for a lot of truck owners that want that extra traction, but they don't want to either change modes or you need winter traction, because a regular part-time four-wheel drive system should not be used on regular paved road surfaces. So if you're in just regular rain, very light snow, etc., you should keep it in two-wheel drive mode if you have a part-time system until you actually slip. Then you engage 4 high. The main reason for that is that when you're in 4 high, like we're in now because we're going through some of these mud pits, things like that, the inputs for the front and rear differentials are locked together. They can't spin at different rates, and that's actually going to decrease your handling ability on a regular paved road surface. So I'm really surprised that we don't see a 4 auto mode in a lot of pickup trucks available in North America today, because it's really the better mode for regular road surfaces, regular daily driving, where a lot of folks really want that extra traction of 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Now, of course, 4 high and 4 low are going to be advantageous on a lot of different terrain surfaces, but for the trail that we've been on today, really 4 low is not required because, again, this 2.7-liter turbo has so much low-end torque that for a lot of trail uses, even very steep surfaces, very, rock climbing kind of situations where you want a little bit of extra control, this engine and transmission combo does incredibly well. Right now we're in the off-road mode in 4 high and just went through there maybe about 1500 RPM, lots and lots of low-end torque. The trail network that we've been driving on today is in a hilly location, and you will certainly notice the small displacement engine on this trail network, because when you're going downhill, there's just not a lot of engine braking. The engine's just screaming along in first gear, and there's not a lot of slowing down going on. That's part of why we have the terrain mode on this terrain management system. If you engage that, then the system is going to automatically use the friction brakes to help slow you down. You can think of this as very advanced hill descent control, because it's going to obviously function like some vehicles' hill descent control, but then it's going to give you the added ability to take the vehicle to a complete stop in that terrain management mode. So if, for instance, I come up here and I just let my foot off, it's going to take us to a complete stop, even going downhill. And it's going to use all 4 brakes on all 4 corners of the vehicle independently of one another to do that. So on slippery surfaces, loose surfaces, etc., it's going to be better able to stop you sooner than if you were to try and put your foot on the brake pedal alone. It's best to think of this system as one pedal driving for off-roading. So even as I'm going into this dip here, if I take my foot off the accelerator pedal, it's going to stop the vehicle right there in that downhill position. And it works at relatively steep angles as well, although there are some angles where you will have to add some extra pressure onto the brake pedal. I really like the functionality of this system, but I do wonder How much stress does this put on the brakes? How much extra heat are you generating because of the smaller displacement engine? Now, obviously, GM has engineered the brakes to be bigger on this vehicle for the towing capacity, for the off-road ability, etc. But there is logically going to be some extra brake heating going on versus just trying to downshift whenever possible. Since we've already talked about when to use 4High versus 4Auto, let's talk about when to use front and rear lockers. Rear lockers are going to be used more often than front lockers. Say we're on a trail like this, actually don't have a need for a rear locker just yet, but this is the kind of situation where it wouldn't hurt too much to engage that rear locker. You'll still have fairly similar turning ability if the rear is locked but the front is open. Although clearly you're going to have the most turning ability in 4Auto with the rear not locked. On a lot of trails, the decision to lock or not lock will come down to how much clearance do you have around the vehicle, how tight do you need to turn around that corner. If it's a very broad corner, it doesn't matter whether everything is locked or not. But if it's a tight corner, you will get some extra binding in the drivetrain if the front and the rear are locked. The front locker is going to give you the most traction ability because you're going to be sending all the power to all the wheels, essentially, and if only one wheel had traction, whether that's the front wheel or the back wheel, that wheel would get the traction. If you don't have the front locked, then either one of the rear wheels, if the rear locker is engaged, would need to have traction, or both front wheels would need to have traction in order to move forward, or some combination thereof. But you will get the most traction with that front locker engaged. Now, if you don't have a front locker, say you had a Toyota Tacoma, the way Toyota handles traction in these situations is by using basically brake-based torque vectoring up front, traction control for lack of a better word. In that situation, what they're going to do is they're going to just use the brakes to send power around, but because they're using the brakes, not a physical locker in the differential, it still has the ability for those front tires to spin at different rates, and that's going to give you the best turning diameter, and it's going to mean that if you're climbing a rock sort of sideways, you're not going to tend to crab downhill, which you can if you have a front locker engaged. That's the reason that Toyota does that, but then there's the question of its ability. It's not going to have the ability to send as much power around as a true front locker like this, and it's also going to be overheating your brakes a bit more, so definitely keep that trade-off in mind. If you want the ultimate four-wheel drive system, you want a system with a front locker as well, and there aren't too many options. We have the GM Twins, the Canyon, and the Colorado, and then we have the Jeep Gladiator, and that's about it in this segment. There's an enormous Tacoma-shaped elephant in the room, and we need to talk about it. The Tacoma is, of course, the best-selling entry in the mid-size truck segment in America. I'm recording this video in April. Sometime in early May, I am going to be filming the new Tacoma in person, so be sure and stay tuned for that video. We know that there are going to be more off-road focused versions, and we know there's going to be at least one hybrid version. Whether that is standard or optional, we don't know yet. We also don't know any pricing information and anything about top-end trims that might compete with this top-end Canyon Denali. On the other hand, I am fairly sure that the Tacoma will be less expensive than this. It's probably going to stick pretty close to the pricing model we see on the current version. And that makes sense because the GMC really is positioned as the more premium entry in this segment. We find a nicer interior than in the base versions of the competition, more standard feature content on the outside, and certainly more power under the hood. You will find about 300 horsepower in the Nissan Frontier, but its base version doesn't have an interior as nice as this, and the engine doesn't have as much torque as this. So even though you do get about 300 horsepower, pretty similar power in that engine, not nearly as much torque, so not nearly as much performance, off-road capability, towing capability, etc. The 430 pound-feet of torque in this engine is truly fantastic, and that's why this is such a fantastic engine, not just in the mid-size truck lineup, but also GM's full-size truck lineup. I wouldn't mind a 2.7-liter turbo under the hood of a Silverado or a Sierra. On the other hand, my only one complaint about this drivetrain is that we don't get the excellent 10-speed automatic transmission behind it. The GM engineers I was able to speak with earlier said that they felt the 8-speed was a better fit for this engine's power characteristics than the 10-speed automatic transmission. But in the back of my mind, I have to think it's probably down to cost. The 10-speed probably costs more than this 8-speed automatic transmission. Although in some of the competitive models, we do find more speeds. The Nissan Frontier, the upcoming generation of the Ford Ranger, you can bet it's probably going to get the 10-speed automatic transmission behind likely that 2.3 or maybe a 2.7-liter turbo under its hood. However, nobody else really has a corollary to this Denali model. I really love the interior. The wood trim, the extra touches inside definitely make this a premium truck. And that's something that we haven't seen. We've seen off-road trucks, we've seen very work truck focused vehicles, but we haven't seen a mid-size premium offering, at least not until now. And this really fits with the GMC badge that we find up front. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Comparably equipped, this is going to be comparably priced to the Colorado. Canyon and Colorado, they're right neck and neck when you look at standard feature content on those trims. Keep in mind, more power under the hood, the standard more aggressive off-road bumper, etc. on the Canyon. However, just base price to base price or minimum feature entry point, they are going to be a bit higher on the Canyon than on the Chevy. But any way you slice it, this could be less expensive than something like the Gladiator in the Jeep lineup. That is pretty darn expensive. And if you're not a fan of turbocharged engines, you don't have too many options. You can take a look at a Nissan Frontier, you can get your Tacoma while they last, but keep in mind that the next generation Tacoma, all indications point to it getting a standard turbocharged engine under the hood as well, and there's good reason for that. This turbo engine is simply better than the outgoing naturally aspirated V6. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned because I will have this at home to run it through our complete battery of tests, especially towing tests, where we can really put this 2.7 liter turbo to the test. I'll see all of you next week.